Hello and welcome to this week's podcast. And now we go straight across to Lore Corner.
Hello everybody, welcome to the Lore Corner again, and this time it is Armadale. So we have on the sofa me, Mod Osborne, Mod Rayleigh, Mod Raven and Mod Stu. Shall we talk about Rite of Passage first? Should we
Probably get out of the way.
You can't help it, it's synonymous, isn't it? You talk about Armadale nowadays and you inevitably open a conversation about Rite of Passage.
Well, we had that slight disadvantage because we did the big talk about Rite of Passage. We did it at one of the Rune Fests. We had the whole stage thing.
Yeah.
You know, I got to go on stage and talk about the glory stuff of Armadale, and then
at least a couple of podcasts.
We did some
podcasts,
podcasts, everything. Yeah. It's like, and then we shelved it because we kind of slightly overreached in terms of what we could feasibly do in the time frame.
Yeah, effectively that was it, wasn't it? It was a case of we created a story that we loved so much that we couldn't de-scope it. Yeah. We couldn't remove elements of it because we liked what we had. Yeah. And it's one of these quests that's almost scenario driven. It was driven by you are doing a certain thing. Like Dishonored Among Thieves is a heist. This quest had a kind of...
It was the exploration
island hopping.
I think it was when you described it as like Legend of Zelda Wind Waker. I just sort of, laid down and started crying.
If it's any help, I've started using that phrase for Easternlands now.
That's absolutely fine. Well, I mean, Eastlands is an interesting thing because the technology that we'll get from Eastlands will help with doing... I've already been thinking about having people on that.
It's the thing with taking time over a project is that you do gain perspective over time, and there are certain things we can do now that we couldn't before, which would be of benefit to the project.
If there are already a number of
finally get to it.
But the position we are with Rite of Passage is that we haven't changed. We still like it.
Yeah.
We're getting a sense from the community that we've probably, or the community has talked about it too much. That there's a little bit of fatigue with it. It almost feels unfair to put it up to a survey or a poll because there is going to be that.
There is certainly a large part of the community that feel that it would be unfair to make it be a poll thing because they've been waiting since because it's always done well in everything that's ever been polled ever that has involved it. It's always been kind of on the cusp of what we'd be looking at. So we know it's something that is wanted. It's just when it comes up against certain other things, it can feel frustrating.
It can feel frustrating. You vote against something because of that. But the core aims of what it does, I mean, the fact that we haven't really had an Armadale-focused quest, I mean, you could say Temple of Ikov, I guess. But having an Armadale-focused quest is something we don't have. That's a good core beat. It's a sense of exploration. Okay, we're getting that with the Easternlands, but we don't really get that in quest content. Yeah. It'd still be nice. And people love wandering different worlds.
Yeah. We've certainly learnt some new technological things as well, which will help us with it. Yeah. I know there's been a number of ways of procedurally generating islands that has turned up that we could steal from. Yeah. I haven't tested them. It might break horribly, but,
But ultimately, I think it's a case of just be patient with us. Apologies that we have made this a thing. I think that's, like Church of You, like other things.
Yeah, I think it's the one thing we just have to commit to doing it at some point. We don't need to poll it. We want to do it anyway ourselves, but let's go silent on it, not dwell on it, and we'll just surprise people.
I think this is us effectively saying, and now begins the radio silence on Rite of Passage. Yeah. Okay.
Presumably, Rite of Passage will still be relevant after Statistica's in games. It's not like
we can always make it relevant.
Yeah, much like the Mighty Fall changed, or the concept of the Mighty Fall changed once we realised Bandos was dying. We're not saying that Armadale was going to die by any means, but if something fundamentally changes with Armadale of the races,
there are
still
already
possible.
some changes that I want to make to the original design based on just discussions that we had and sort of...
You originally had Xenia in it.
I originally had Xenia in it because I wanted to push her off the island and watch her fall to her death. But I killed her another way, so that's fine. Twice.
Good Lord.
The weird thing with Xenia is I actually grew to quite like Xenia in No Man's Elegy, and I felt kind of guilty about murdering her.
I like that. Over the course of writing your own content, you've you're liking your own imaginary construct. Congratulations, Jane.
That's fine.
All right, okay, so let's get on to Armadale. Yeah. Armadale's a weird one for me in terms of the kind of the Fifth Age stuff, because certainly pre-God Wars Dungeon, Armadale was largely a kind of weird absent figure. It was, if you think about Ikov, Temple of Ikov, the Guardians of Armadale.
He was all over the place. I mean, having human followers, and I think that's in part because the Avianti were they'd left, and the ones who were dead. So you had to have some representation. Pretty much the only significant contribution he had was the staff. Yeah, and that was in somebody else's storyline. So he was sidelined quite a lot.
He was really just a couple of mentions.
Yeah,
but I think that kind of worked because Armadale's one of the youngest of the gods, and that time represents when he was like, yay, I'm a god, and then other older, more crafty gods Saradomin kind of was like, hey guy, yeah, we're very similar philosophies, yeah, we should work together, and basically made him effectively a general.
Yeah.
And that's, he was that kind of manipulated, so he wasn't as important compared to the other things because other people were pulling his strings, which is kind of why
and
he's
that's
changed
the storyline. God Wars Dungeon
yeah.
storyline in particular, wasn't it? I remember the storyline that came with a lot of the new armours and weapons was that he was given these kind of loyalty bracelets by Saradomin, I seem to remember.
Yeah.
Well, they all were, weren't they?
Yeah.
But yeah.
He very much embraced it. And it was almost like kind of Armadyl represented the martyr god or the downtrodden god. It showed that there was a god hierarchy.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know if that god hierarchy would exist without Armadyl, weirdly.
No,
because
I think
that's subservience.
I think that's what he's needed for.
Yeah. And it was also good to show, particularly with the edicts, a god that had left, and had taken a lot with it, with him. Because obviously you see so much of Saradomin, you see so much of Zamorak and Bandos in the world.
And we've seen more of that as time's gone on. I mean, we didn't want just every god to be kicked out by Gothic, so having Armadyl leave of his own volition kind of kickstarted that idea of other gods leaving under other means, say Seren's shattering and Zaros' banishment and Tumakan's
it's really nice. So it's not everybody
sacrifice.
just got kicked out. It's not this kind of the same thing everywhere.
It also helped to show that, God can lose quite badly, because he lost quite badly.
Yeah.
Armadale, he lost a lot.
Yes, in the moment of Stone of Jazz, in the wilderness.
Yeah.
I mean, we've made it clear now that kind of wiped out so much of his forces.
He lost
He
a lot
actually
of people.
believed they were all dead.
Yeah.
Which is tragic. So again, we've got martyrdom, we've got tragedy, we've got downtrodden. It's just, all of this is the underdog or the weak, maybe. I mean, if you want to, you could argue.
We've always gone for naive, I think.
Yeah.
It's more ideological than physical.
Yeah. Which made it actually really difficult when it came to the 6th Age. We knew that we wanted to have Armadyl versus Bandos because we liked that physicality versus elegance, the hawk versus the beast kind of thing, and then it became Burden the Beast. But how we represented Armadyl, how do you represent somebody who's a martyr, who's downtrodden, who's constantly losing? How is that actually empowering or interesting? And so we came up with the first concepts. It was kind of a hawk commander in some white shining paladin-like armour. It didn't really resonate with us. It was like
very Saradomin-esque in terms of colours.
Yeah,
early on,
we were always hitting our head against.
It was cool artwork, but it didn't work.
It felt like it was an Armadyl general rather than Armadyl himself. And then we sat down.
What was it? It was, how do we make him more godlike? It's like more wings.
Yeah, yes. We had more wings. We had electricity zapping out of his eyes, because that's what you want. You want to see a hawk flying towards you and then zaps you with his electric eyes,
like they do.
Yeah, I hate those hawks. And nothing was clicking. But then there was that kind of revelatory moment as we all sat down and talked about what we could do with Armadyl in the future, and that notion of what if there was just a turning point? What if the movement out of the 5th Age, the movement away once the edicts had been broken, like Gothics had come back. What if he just changed and actually kind of built some resilience and decided, no, I'm going to be better than I was? And then the Phoenix, and that word just changed everything. So then that solved the colour problem. Because Phoenix is those autumnal reds and oranges. And suddenly Armadyl, that kind of shit, it was the first one to have a god symbol that changed, that light blue wings to the autumnal wings now.
And his whole like the whole thing about his naivety as well. It's like he's stepping up. He's not going to be subservient. He's not going to follow anymore. He's going to lead.
Yeah.
He's learned. He knows that he was being manipulated. He knows what the other gods are up to. And that's kind of why because there's a lot of people call Armadyl a hypocrite because of wanting to fight Bandos. But ultimately that moment was him stepping up and realising that, so he wants peace, he wants people to survive. He doesn't want to lose any more Aviancy like he lost before, because that's heartbreaking to him. He couldn't, so that god couldn't go through that again. And Bandos, out of all the other gods, you can reason with Zamorak, you can reason with Saradomin. You can't reason with Bandos. Bandos is not a being of reason. Bandos wants to see every living being in a massive free-for-all. Yeah. And that would never change.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I also think a lot of people call him a hypocrite just because Bandos called him a hypocrite. Yeah. And I mean, that's just Bandos' point of view. Whether or not he is, for going to war with Bandos, a hypocrite is entirely one of your own perspective.
Yeah. And it's all about giving these gods, a negative, a flaw, or a perceived flaw, potentially. We didn't want everybody, because one of the problems that you could have with Armadyl is that he could have the Saradomin problem of being pure goodness.
Yeah.
And anybody who has got any feeling that they represent goodness or kindness or charity would go immediately to Armadale. And so we wanted to underline possible hypocrisy, so we put that in with Bandos, but also that feeling of weakness.
Yeah.
That feeling of he has been defeated before, why couldn't he be defeated now? And that insecurity that maybe it'll happen. So that might bleed into any future content.
And still that kind of edge of naivety, it's still there.
Yeah.
Because whilst he did the whole fight with Bandos, he still, believes the other gods can be reasoned with. He's still happy to get into a dialogue with them, that kind of thing. And it's that kind of thinking that opens himself up for other people to take advantage of it.
We loved the notion of the world events becoming semi-finals to a final.
Yeah.
And that idea of Saradomin facing off against Armadale is delicious.
Yes.
Because I think this feeds into what you were saying, which is that could you, with diplomacy, change Saradomin's mind that mortals should, kind of own this world and, really you're just tending the flock rather than being this kind of militant overwatcher.
It would be so interesting.
He'll be really, you'd love to be a fly on the wall, wouldn't you?
You kind of imagine Saradomin would want to bring him back into subservience. It's like, we teamed up back in the God Wards, we should do that again, right?
Yeah.
And Armadale's like, no, I'm going off on my own and doing my own thing.
Yeah,
and him trying to change Saradomin
and watching all the kind of the Zamarakians, the Zerosian players going, who should I follow, Armadale or Saradomin? It just
that would be what I'd like to see. Which way because you'd have the Bandosian and the Zamarakian people. It's like, which side would they go with? Because logically, you'd have all the Zamarakian people going with Armadale and the Bandosian people going with Saradomin. But the Bandosian people really think Saradomin's better than Armadale. I mean, there's the argument that at least Armadale followed Bandos's teachings by murdering Bandos, So.
Well, one of the things that is beautiful about the Sixth Age is that democratic choices decided what our storylines are going to be.
Yeah.
And Armadale is now a forerunner and prominent in Sliskay's endgame. Mm-hmm. He's top of the board. In all likelihood, Sliskay is going to invite him to this endgame. And you start wondering, what could be the fallout? Could Armadale become one of the most prominent gods, all based on democratic choice?
What happens if Armadale does get the Stone of Jazz and gets that kind of power boost?
Yeah, how does that fit into his philosophy?
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and the beauty is you can easily forget it, that this was largely driven by player choice. And there will be more choice, kind of solo choice in the quest content as well. But he's probably one of the few gods that doesn't really have a gripe with Sliskay.
He does a bit.
He's got the
staff. He nicked his staff and he nicked his
his citadel. Yeah,
so he'd like them
nick
back.
My citadel,
but that's just a kind of property thing. I mean, that is far less personal than all the other gods, and it's the personal issues that rile people up. He's not likely to get petty over the loss of his citadel. He'd like it back, but it's not the most important thing to all. He's more cares about his Avianti. Whereas you've got people like Saradomin and Icthalarin who feel slighted by Sliskay, and slights, they drive people much sort of more than property.
Marvellous. So I'll do a cheeky scree, and draw Armadale to a close. There we go. So we had a nice chat about Armadale. Next time round, we'll have Bandos. So we'll talk about our first dead god in next time's Lore Corner. Thank you very much for listening.
And so with me today, I have Mod Infinity.
Hello.
So Mod Infinity, what is your favourite piece of RuneScape music and why?
I mean, it is a very tricky one, but I'd have to say Wilderness and number one, the original one.
The original, yeah.
And the reason is it kind of gives me that nostalgic feeling of danger and fear as to when you kind of go into the wilderness. I think it kind of, it sits well with me. And it's probably my favourite.
You're going to be PK'd as soon as you hear it.
Yeah, when I'm going to lose my stuff. So that would be my choice.
Right, well, let's listen to it now. And now across the Mod Infinity and the player support team on the sofas.
Hello and welcome to the customer support segment of this podcast. Now today we're going to be talking about some really interesting stuff, and it's about the processes that we follow internally, as well as firing some questions towards Mod Sammy, who's new to the podcast. And he's our customer support trainer. But before we get into all of that, I'm Mod Infinity, one of the ops managers in customer support, and joined by Mod Steve W.
Yep, so I'm Steve, back for another podcast. Really love doing this stuff and really excited that we've got Mod Sammy here today. So it's going to be a really good one, I think.
Absolutely. And Mod Sammy?
Hi all, my name's Mod Sammy. I've been with Jagex for 10 years now within the customer support team in a variety of different roles, and currently working on training everyone in terms of processes and making sure that we're helping you guys out in the best way possible.
All right, cool. Sounds good. So just to kind of get a bit more into your role. So if we've got new starters coming in or a change happens, you're the guy who's going to train that out and make sure everyone's aware of it.
Yeah, so my main focus is making sure that everyone's doing the right thing kind of by the player and by the business. So I spend a long amount of time with people that are new into the team. So we kind of have a really large 3-month in-depth training process to make sure everyone understands the intricacies of RuneScape and the different support issues that we have. And then also spend time with people that have been here for a long time, making sure that any changes in process happen, that they understand that process, that we're all working, so that when the players contact us, right, they getting that same answer from everyone, and that same answer should hopefully put a smile on their faces.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Mod Sammy. So I want to kick things off to talk about our ethos and the kind of values that the customer support team live by. So Sammy, I don't know if you can kind of touch upon some of the things that we're really passionate about and keen to do by our customers.
The values we focus on are about making sure that the player leaves their interaction with us in a happy way, right? So we try and do what we can to help support our players, and that we have kind of some guidance around doing that, but we try and empower the JMods that we have within the support team to do the right thing by the players. And, you know, we work to making sure that we respond within a 24-hour time frame, right? We have our CSAT, and we kind of use that as a coaching tool to make sure that we're taking on board the players' feedback in terms of whether that's how a ticket was dealt with, how a process was, and giving that feedback to the guys.
Okay, cool. So just about CSAT. So some people won't know what that means or what we measure it against. So just kind of elaborate on that for me.
So we have a few different ways to measure the success, and you'll see that from Mod Kelvin's updates that he does each month. But CSAT is about customer satisfaction. So what is really important to us, and I touched upon it a minute ago, is making sure that the customer is happy. So we ask people when we resolve their issue if they can leave us feedback, and whether that was a good interaction or a bad interaction, and we use that feedback there. Last month we hit 90% good, which was a great result for us. We always aim to make sure that we're 90% or above, because happiness for the player is an important key within what we try and deliver.
Okay, cool. I think it's important to mention that the kind of 1 out of 10 customers who rate us as poor, where we have a dedicated outreach team who look to resolve their issues, so look into that poor feedback. So anyone who rates our service as poor, then we're really interested to know why. And so all that feedback's logged in a system. We review that. Where necessary, we'll contact the customer again to try and put things right. But, you know, generally we'll have, you know, if a customer contacts us trying to get their account unbanned or try and access an account which isn't theirs, then when we tell them no or go away, it's often that they'll just, you know, rate us poor. So absolutely, we're not perfect, but, you know, where we think we can improve or make changes, we'll put them into place. And I guess, Mod Sammy, as a trainer, you're one of the guys who's looking at that feedback and seeing where we can make changes to process to better support the customer, right?
Yeah, outreach is a great example. So those people that are talking to players that have had an unhappy experience for whatever reason, whether that's process, whether that's because of one of the JMods decisions, I actually have regular meetings with them to look at if we need to tweak anything, if we need to kind of give that feedback, so that we can always improve the service we're delivering. We are really keen and hot on making sure that the service we give is the best service out there. We kind of pride ourselves on being above the normal kind of support center and making sure that we really deliver the best service that we can.
Yeah. All right, fantastic. And I think it's worth mentioning that as a customer service team, I think people might just think that we're not gamers, we don't play RuneScape, we have no interest in the game. But, you know, we're completely passionate about the game. You often see on people's lunch breaks, people logging into RuneScape, playing, you know, competing against their friends. We had a whole group of us and a team of us at RuneFest and had a blast. So, you know, when you're contacting customer support, you're not just contacting a random person who's not involved in the actual product. We're all deeply invested in the product. We'll often be talking to QA on a regular basis or development teams to see how we can get involved, you know, what suggestions we can give to improve the game. I think that's really important. And you wouldn't find that in an ordinary customer support department.
I think that's really important because there is a misconception sometimes that there aren't people at the end of players' messages, and that we do have kind of a system there that's automatic that gets rid of people. But actually, we have a dedicated team that are really passionate and have the same passions as our guys do that play RuneScape, right? In fact, I would say our JMods are as passionate about helping players as our players are passionate about RuneScape.
Yeah, I think it's a good statement. Okay. So let's get into some more specific processes and tools, okay? So I talked about the ethos and it sounds all great, and I know it's great, right? We live it, we breathe it, and hopefully our players who contact us can see that too. So we looked at social media and some hot topics, and there's been quite a few players discussing account recovery processes and how that all works. And naturally there's some concerns raised by players whenever anything comes to account security. Obviously they've got questions, and obviously they want them answered. So if we kind of go back a few months ago, if a player needed to access their account, they'll know that needed to send in a ticket or an email and provide all their details in a free form email, and they could type what they needed to do. And then within 24 hours, a member of staff would reply back to them, maybe asking for more information or whatever it might be. And that chain could go on for quite some time to ascertain whether or not that player does own the account. So relatively recently, some changes were made to that system, and now players fill out a simple account recovery form. And Sammy, some players have expressed concern that it allows hijackers to get access to their accounts more easily, or it's less secure as this old email way. I don't know if you could talk about that and just discuss what changes were made. Is it less secure? Should players be concerned about this?
No, definitely not. Players should be actually reassured that it's actually more secure, because there are problems with people coming in via email. And there are unfortunately security issues with email. Actually, the changes we have made is a more secure way of someone trying to regain access to their account. And if I've done my job correctly, the guys have all been really trained in making sure they know what to spot and what to look for. We made the changes for a couple of reasons, right? So I touched upon customer satisfaction being one of the things that we strive to deliver. And, we try and make customers happy by getting them a response as quick as possible. And you touched upon it in terms of emails. When a player sends us an email, it can take up to 24 hours for us to get back, and then you may need to contact us again as a player. Actually, with the change to the new form, that's a lot quicker. We can get to you in 4 hours instead of 24 hours, right? And actually, normally we can get your issue resolved first time, rather than maybe having to send 2 or 3 emails back from one another. All of the information that we ask for in that web form will help us make our decision, and is all encapsulated there, rather than someone who sends us an email with piecemeal information. So we have to kind of go back and forth. So it is reviewed, right? All of these web forms are reviewed. There's not a system that goes yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, 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 yes, no, yes, no, right? Actually, it's human beings that go and look at the account history, that look at what's happening with the player, looking at what's happening with the information that's being provided. Where has that been? Who has that been accessed by? What is the history of the account? And then making that educated decision to do what's right by the player and hopefully getting our players back in game.
Yeah, and I think it's important to mention that if anyone's in doubt, then we won't give an account away. We have to be absolutely 100% certain that appeal relates to the account owner before we give it away. And so some players might get frustrated that we keep denying their appeals, but there's always a good reason behind it. It's because that appeal doesn't contain enough strong information, whether it's earlier passwords or billing information.
One of the big things that we are focusing on right now is about player education. And we want to make sure that if we're saying no to you, you kind of understand why. So if we're saying we can't give you this access to this account, we're saying why we're not doing that. And you'll see it with the emails that we send out as well. If a player contacts us about an email, we'll kind of make sure that we're kind of directing you to the knowledge base, which has had a refresh as Mod Mick spoke about in a podcast a few weeks ago. We're trying to give the players as much education and understanding behind our decision making as possible. So yeah, you're right. We won't just say no and then shut the door. We'll say, no, look, this is what we need from you in order to get you back in game.
All right, sounds good. So to clarify and recap on that, it's safer, it's more secure and quicker for both the player and us as JMods. And so for me, that's kind of a win all round. And security hasn't been compromised. It's no less secure than the old system. In fact, it's better.
Winning.
Nice. All right. So much time. I know you're going to rush off, but if you can give us one more thing or one thing which has changed and makes appeals more secure or better, what would that be?
So one big change with the new system is that players can now securely submit passwords as a piece of information with the new web form. So we don't see them, and a JMod will never ask you for a password, okay? But when you submit it on the web form, it's kind of the system cleverly matches it up to say there's a match. When we had the email support system before and people contacted us about this, people were giving out passwords, which was actually making their account insecure.
Yeah, really insecure.
And we couldn't use it. We couldn't match it up because we never see the passwords themselves. So we were not able to take that as a piece of information. So the web form is a really good way of getting more information and making it more secure and helping our JMods help our players.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much, Mod.
All right, thank you.
So, Mod Steve W, over to you. So I think, just to summarise that kind of piece there, the forms are more efficient, more secure and safer. And we've got a team of really passionate JMods in the customer support team who play the product, who play the game, love everything about it. And, when it comes to customer satisfaction, that's high on our list of things to do. We're getting a 24-hour response time out to customers. We have dedicated teams who will outreach to customers who provide us with poor feedback. And just a continuous improvement loop to make sure that everything we're doing is as good as it can be for every player who contacts us. So Steve, I want to kind of quickly touch upon offence appeals. It's one of the things which falls under customer support. I want you to talk about how we handle them. Again, there's quite a general sentiment, or maybe in the past there's been some kind of discussions about offence appeals and how we process them. And there's a general feeling that they may be handled by a machine or an automatic system, just denies, accepts. So can you kind of, talk about, is that true? What happens with an offence appeal?
Yeah, I mean, I know there is that perception. It's something you often see. People think that these sort of things are automated. Sometimes you get a response to an offence appeal quite quickly. And actually, that's good news. That means that we're really quick at responding to it and we've looked into it. But sometimes it can give the impression that actually this just sat in a very short queue and the machine dealt with it and denied the response, straight away. That's definitely not what happens. Every single offence appeal is read by JMod, by a member of staff. Especially trained people. Mod Sammy will have specific training sessions with these people to actually process offence appeals.
Okay.
And everything's read, but by a person. It's literally on the screen. They're reading it, dealing with it. A bit like a court. You're presenting your evidence in court, and the JMod is the judge, if you like, and they're considering all the evidence and then deciding what to do with that appeal.
Okay, Steve. So if it is a human processing these appeals, why is it that we hear these stories of people putting in gibberish or song lyrics in the offence appeal text, and that offence then being accepted and the offence removed? How does that happen?
Yeah, I mean, that does happen sometimes. And there is actually a very simple explanation for it. And when we're dealing with an offence appeal, we'll take into account what the player's written into the text box, and that gives us some context to consider. But essentially what we're looking at is, was this account hijacked, for example? Was this offence correct? Should it have been applied? And we will always fall on the side of the player. We'll always give the benefit of the doubt if we can. The objective really of the offence appeal team is to try and remove mutes and bans if they can. So what happens is an offence is applied, let's say it's applied incorrectly. Now the player can then submit the offence appeal. They could write pretty much anything they like in that free text box. It's not going to help the appeal at all because it's just useless information. But the hard fact is that this offence was incorrect and shouldn't have been added. And therefore, the JMod reviewing it will say, no, it's not right that this player should be muted. It's not right that this offence is on the account and grant it. Now, of course, we don't have the option to sort of grant it and sort of tag a little note into the player and saying, actually, this is not because you gave me the lyrics to Bohemian Rhapsody in the offence appeal text. That's not why we've granted your appeal. We've granted it because you didn't actually commit this offence. We don't have that option. So, of course, the perception from the player is you submit an offence appeal, write a load of gibberish, and actually, the appeal gets granted. And, of course, many will get denied as well because, the offence is correct.
Yeah.
So again, it works both ways. But, of course, you only hear from the people with these sort of crazy stories. You'll see YouTube videos and things going around of people saying ridiculous things like the cat walked on my keyboard and things like that to try and explain offensive language offences and things like that. And then they'll show that appeal was granted and they're sort of trying to prove the point that the whole system's automated and we don't read it. And in fact, it's the polar opposite of that. It's the fact that we are reading it and are considering all the evidence. That's why it's granted. It's the exact opposite of it being an automated process.
Okay, great. So you touched upon the fact that we're also looking at offences which were issued when a hijacker was in control of an account. So what kind of options are available to the staff processing appeals when they come across an account which was hijacked and the hijacker, caused an offence on the account? What do we do in those cases?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of checks. I mean, when the offence is first added, there's a kind of hijacking check there to make sure that the account's not hijacked. But then, the odd one can slip through, so we're not completely satisfied with that. That's why players do get the option to appeal it. And so then at the appeal stage, there'll be a second check for hijacking. And obviously staff have access to the back-end system, the back-end system for RuneScape accounts. So we can see things like the internet service provider that's being used, geographical location. We can see the date and exact date, time, server location, notifications and things like that offences took place, and you can compare that information to the system held in our system. And a hijacking is normally really clear and really obvious, and it kind of stands out. And there'll be other indications of a hijacking. The password might have changed on the account, the registered email might have been changed on the account, some other activity like that, which would indicate a hijacker's had access. But, when that does happen, we'll always kind of side with the owner. Our priority is, let's get this account back to the owner. And also, let's get it back to them in the state that they left it, in terms of, there's not mutes on the account, there's not offences that they're not responsible for sitting on the account.
All right, great. Fantastic. Thanks, Steve. So I think listeners will be really reassured that, offence appeals are taken seriously and they're reviewed carefully. And hopefully puts to bed the myth that, there's a system which processes offence appeals. No, it's not the case. It's all manually reviewed by specialist JMods, trained by Mod Sammy in these sessions. Okay, so finally, Steve, another kind of big thing which players talk about are abuse reports and the kind of the process that we follow when reviewing them. And so we'll often have players say that I've reported this scammer on World 54 yesterday, he's still there breaking the rules, or someone's threatened to report me, but what's going to happen? What happens when someone reports bad behaviour or rule breaking in game? Is it a system which deals with that, or is it again members of staff processing those reports?
Yes, I mean, when you make a report in game, capture about the last 60 seconds of conversation, and that'll be all conversation. So, clan chat, private chat, public chat, all that conversation is captured and presented to a JMod to review. We can see the rule that was chosen by the person that reported the incident, the rule they thought was being broken or the thing that concerned them. Yep. And obviously we've got information about the account and obviously the chat log. And we'll kind of read through that and review it. And the truth is that there's some very low-level reporting that comes into us. When people, someone says a word like bum, and that will get reported to us. Right. And clearly that's not something that we're really, really concerned about and want to take strong action against. So, the truth is there are a lot of reports that we just review. We read every line, and we just decide not to do anything with that. We just think it's fairly low level. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there are situations where there possibly is some rule breaking, but it's maybe not been captured in the report. Maybe it happened over a minute ago. Maybe sort of someone is saying something, but it relates to something that maybe happened on another account and we don't have that evidence. And sometimes we can look into it and link those things together. But as a general kind of principle, we're really looking at that kind of snapshot of conversation that's presented to us. So sometimes nothing happens because we just don't have the evidence. Sometimes people will be talking about doing things like scamming, but they're not actually trading anyone, not actually scamming anyone. They're just talking about it. And sometimes, because it's free chat, it's just not clear whether the person is admitting to scamming or whether they're just talking about scamming in general. And so, just because we get a report for item scamming and someone sort of says scamming in it, we're not just straight away going to say, let's do that person for item scamming. We need some evidence. We're going to mute this person. We're going to cause some disruption to this person in terms of their free chat in the game or being removed from the game temporarily. So we want to be absolutely sure that, we're applying the right offence. And the final thing is that sometimes players are reported by more than one person. So, obviously if it was, let's say, an offensive language offence that we were going to add and that was reported by 4 different people, we're not going to add that offence 4 times to the same player. That would blatantly be unfair. Yep. So 3 of those reports, won't be processed because, we've already dealt with the suspect, the reported player has already been dealt with through another report. So it's sort of a combination of those things, are kind of looking for the high risk things, the things that really do matter, the really serious rule breaking, focusing on that. Yeah. Combination of kind of low level reporting, things that we don't need to see, where we can see instances where people could have used ignore features or something like that. It was maybe slightly disruptive gameplay, but not the worst rule breaking in the world, and could really have been dealt with by just popping someone on the ignore list or using a profanity filter because, some word you see that you might be a bit offended to could just be filtered out. We won't take a lot of action and spend a lot of time reviewing those reports. Okay. But anything that is concerning, any really serious rule breaking, that's going to land in front of a JMod. They're going to be specially trained by Sammy. They're going to have all the tools they need. They're going to read every line in the report. And if there's serious rule breaking there, then we'll take action on it.
All right, thanks for that, Steve. Really interesting stuff. And I think this podcast actually really insightful into the nature and the work that customer support do. But before we sign off, let's just provide one thing each that customers might not know about customer support. We'll start off with you, Steve.
Well, offence appeals, they are read by person. We read every line. It's worth sending it to us, worth taking the time over it. We will read with it, deal with it, and do the best thing by the player based on the evidence we've got.
All right, cool. Sammy?
Training happens every day. It doesn't stop when someone's been here after a month. We continue to invest in our staff because we want our staff to invest in the game and our players.
Okay, cool. And for me, it would be that we are 24/7. Our JMods don't stop. Customer support's always here, always responding to appeals, always looking after our players. Day and night, every single day of the week, Christmas Day, New Year's Day, we're here, we're working hard to support our players. All right, so thanks for listening, everybody. Hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Give us feedback, tweet us at Jaguar Support, post on our forums, let us know how you thought this podcast went. And until next time, that's me, Mod Infinity.
Me, Mod CW.
Me, Mod Sammy.
Take care, see you later.
Bye.
Thanks to the player support team. That's the end of our podcast for this week, but be sure to catch our God Wars Dungeon 2 preview. Bye!